Okay. Hello, everyone. Bienvenidos. Um, Welcome to Gathering Metrics and Setting Boundaries, Reusing Collections as Data and the Impact of AI. As a reminder, today's session will be recorded. So folks who are online, if you do not want to appear in the recording, please feel free to turn off your camera. Okay. Firstly, I want to welcome new RDA members. There are a lot of folks who are new to RDA in and of itself, and so I wanted to make sure to bring up the six guiding principles of RDA: openness, consensus, harmonization, community-driven, nonprofit, and technically neutral, and inclusivity. I say this as a new member, so hello, I see you. And this is my first RDA, so this is really exciting. It's also my co-chair's first time, so treat us kindly. As a way of introducing myself, quickly I will say, my name is Hannah Skates-Kettler. I'm the Associate University Librarian for Academic Services at Iowa State University. And I'm here with my friend and colleague Yasmin Shorish, the Director of Scholarly Communication Strategies at James Madison University. We bring with us previous experience and work in collections as data, specifically as part of a Mellon-funded Collections as Data project, and our current work together on responsible AI in libraries and archives, which Yasmin will talk about in a minute. Secondly, for all the newness, we also want folks to be aware of this new interest group as part of RDA, the Collections as Data Interest Group, which formed this year. And by way of giving you a little bit of context about this new interest group, the group is really aimed at collections professionals in a range of different roles to promote good collection practices and work as advocates for the construction of responsible and sustainable infrastructures for information sharing, as well as to establish models for responsible and culturally sensitive development of data resources, while also navigating the challenges and opportunities provided by new technologies, one of which we'll talk about today. And so really we're creating a space, therefore, to examine and make alignments with our professional values, policy, and practices as it relates to collections work, and encourage an exchange of expertise around these collecting areas in different domains. A little bit of information on how to join this new group. You may find us on the RDA website and under the Collections as Data Interest Group information. Here, additional context, the whole charge can be viewed there as well. So welcome, please join. Okay, so for today, we're going to go through a series of presentations, and we have left ample time at the end of the presentations for questions from the audience for our panelists, as well as, and I hope very much, for a large discussion with all of you. We actually have questions for you, but I do hope that there is we have a chance here for a robust dialogue. But this session aims to provide insight on how institutions are assessing use of collections as data and how AI impacts the parameters of that use. And so we'll be presenting a few case studies here, a few approaches the panelists will be explaining to you all, and we hope to hear about your own interactions and work in this space as well. The agenda today looks like this. We'll have our presenters go through these 5 case studies today, one on responsible AI, which Yasmin will go through. First, followed by the International GLAM Labs community update, information on the DCraft project, the International GLAM Labs evolution, as well as language detections and large language models and AI and institutional repositories. We ask that folks make note of your questions because we will save the questions from the audience for the end of all of those presentations. Folks online, please utilize the chat. I will monitor them. If you feel I've missed it, feel free to post it again. And then followed by the Q&A, we'll have about half the time really relegated for discussion with this group. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Yasmin Shorish, who will talk about the Responsible AI project.
Thank you, Hannah. My name is Yasmin Chorish. I'm going to speak about this project that is funded by the United States federal funder, the Institute of Museum and Library Services. We are developing tools for responsible AI implementation in libraries and archives. We have a large project team from a range of different universities in the United States, and also a range of different backgrounds within libraries and archives functions. And here they all are. The goals of this project, we are about a little over halfway through our funding term. We are seeking to develop practical resources to support responsible use of artificial intelligence in library and archives contexts, and also aid the practitioners to consider values and ethical implications as they embark on those new AI projects. This is not able to be read by anybody right now, but it wanted to show you what our current prototype looks like for this decision-making tool or artifact. We're still struggling with exactly how to name this thing, but you really cannot see, so I'll describe. It is a large sheet right now that has some instructions for you as an individual to work through scenarios and consider values that you hold most closely. So there we have some suggested values for you to choose from, and then you would select kind of the top 3 values that you hold the closest to you. They could be to you personally as a individual. They could be to you in the context of your professional identity. And then you would use those values and consider them in these scenarios of some kind of artificial intelligence implementation project. And it's, the scenarios include projects before implementation, but they also include, this thing is already implemented. What do you do about that? And then you have an opportunity to work through the same kind of scenario through a different lens, which we're calling a stakeholder lens. This URL at the bottom, which is the osf.io link, is where you can find this material and other materials related to the project. So that link is bigger than any of the other texts, so hopefully, in short, you can get that down if you're interested. We've been testing this through different groups of individuals. So it's still in prototype mode. Future directions are going to be refining the tool, object, artifact, and then creating a digital interface as well as something that you can do on paper. And as we make progress on that work, please use this website to check on updates, and we would love it for people to adopt such a process and provide feedback on it as well as we consider next steps. So now I'm going to turn over. These are very quick presentations. They're like longer than lightning talks, but not a full presentation. It's a rolling thunderous cloud with the lightning that sort of travels for a long time talks. And so now I'm very happy to pass this presentation on to our virtual presenter, Gustavo Candela is joining us from Spain, and he will take it away.
Hola a todos, soy Gustavo Candela y soy profesor en la Universidad de Alicante de Informática y la Universidad de Alicante está en España. Y bueno, hoy voy a presentar la comunidad internacional Glam Lab, la que he tenido la posibilidad de realizar mi carrera académica desde que se creó. Y bueno, pues sí que me gustaría mencionar que esta comunidad no hubiera sido posible sin la superayuda de Mahendra Mahey, que fue el manager del British Library Labs y que fue el que tuvo la idea de crear esta comunidad. ¿Vale? Actualmente tiene unas 84 instituciones y alrededor de unos 350 miembros. Y en este mapa podéis ver un poco cómo están distribuidos estos miembros y sí que me gustaría que si alguno de los participantes en esta sesión está interesado en aparecer en este mapa, pues que se ponga en contacto con nosotros porque no es necesario ningún tipo de firma de acuerdo ni nada, simplemente con que tengan un interés desde su institución es suficiente para aparecer en este mapa y formar parte de la comunidad. Next. Entre los miembros que pertenecen a esta comunidad, pues mayoritariamente tenemos bibliotecas nacionales de todo el mundo, pero también tenemos universidades o instituciones relacionadas con el patrimonio cultural o también investigadores individuales que realizan su investigación basada en las colecciones digitales que hacen disponibles las instituciones de patrimonio cultural. Entre los objetivos de la comunidad internacional Glam Labs, pues obviamente encontramos experimentar con las colecciones digitales de forma innovadora y creativa. Sí que me gustaría decir que yo solo lo he hecho de forma digital, pero hay muchas instituciones que ahora mismo pues, están montando un laboratorio en su institución para interactuar con las colecciones de forma física. También promover la publicación y reutilización responsable, me gustaría remarcar responsable en la presentación como la que tenemos hoy aquí, de colecciones digitales en instituciones de patrimonio cultural. Y obviamente es lo que mayoritariamente hemos hecho también, es compartir buenas prácticas y guías. En primer lugar, tuvimos un primer evento en la Biblioteca Británica, como he dicho anteriormente, que fue seguido por un evento en 2019 en Copenhague. Gracias a estos dos eventos pensamos que sería interesante publicar unas buenas prácticas en forma de libro y 16 miembros de la comunidad nos reunimos en septiembre de 2019 en Qatar y fruto de esa reunión publicamos el libro Open England Lab que a continuación veréis que tiene diferentes traducciones y que está disponible con licencias abiertas. Luego tuvimos un parón, que la participación fue mayoritariamente online debido al COVID y diferentes circunstancias, pero últimamente nos hemos vuelto a reunir y, por ejemplo, asistimos al evento DHNB en Islandia y recientemente hemos hecho un webinar con la International Glam Labs Community hace una semana comentando los resultados de nuestra participación en la conferencia de Islandia. Y aquí podemos ver una selección de publicaciones que hemos realizado en el marco de la comunidad. Y en la zona inferior izquierda podéis ver el libro Open England Lab con hasta 7 traducciones, incluidas el español. El libro se encuentra con licencia CC0, con que podéis utilizarlo para lo que queráis. También, como he comentado, pues realizamos talleres y workshops de forma online y presencial. En la zona superior, donde veis el logo de DHNB, podéis ver el trabajo que presentamos en Islandia y que básicamente consiste en un framework para crear una colección de Jupyter Notebooks desde cero. ¿Cómo lo podemos hacer? En el centro podemos ver un póster que presentamos en el marco de la comunidad en la conferencia TPDL sobre el uso de Wikidata en instituciones de patrimonio cultural. Y en la parte de la derecha de esta diapositiva podéis ver dos secciones que tenemos en nuestra web, una de ellas dedicada al acceso computacional y el uso de Jupyter Notebooks que os dejo el enlace a un artículo de investigación que os puede resultar interesante también. Y uno de los resultados de los que estoy más orgulloso, tanto de la comunidad y por el trabajo que realicé yo también, que es la lista de verificación o checklist para publicar colecciones como datos. Next, please. Y finalmente, si os ha interesado el trabajo que hemos presentado aquí, pues tenemos un canal de Twitter, tenemos una lista de correo y también tenemos un canal de Slack por si os queréis unir. No lo he dicho al principio, pero en realidad la comunidad Glam Labs es una comunidad de personas y, por ejemplo, yo he podido hacer mi carrera académica, mucha parte de mi carrera académica, gracias a la participación en esta comunidad. Y nada, muchas gracias por vuestro tiempo y paso al siguiente ponente.
We'll have a presentation on Dcraft from Santi Thompson and Ayla Stein-Kenfield.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Santi Thompson. I'm from the University of Houston in the United States, and I'm joined with by my colleague, Ayla Stein-Kenfield, who's at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, also in the United States. We're here to talk really briefly about Dcraft, which is the digital content reuse assessment framework toolkit. So to set the stage for you all in this brief talk, I'm going to share more about the background and one of the first core components of our toolkit called the recommended practices. Then I'll pass it over to Ayla, who will talk about our ethical guidelines for reuse, as well as our education modules. So we'll start with some background on the project. Dcraft, or as I mentioned, the Digital Content Reuse Assessment Framework Toolkit, is an open access, collaboratively developed toolkit that documents available assessment tools, best practices, and ethical guidelines for measuring the reuse of digital assets, facilitating both standardization and impact measurements in the digital library field. It was generously funded by the Institute of Museum and Library Services, and the grant project itself concluded in June of 2023. And this whole effort was part of the Digital Library Federation's Assessment Interest Group, which seeks to engage the community in developing best practices and guidelines for various kinds of digital library assessment. There were many groups that had contributed to the project over time, and we want to take a brief second to acknowledge those folks. First are the project team members who collaboratively designed the project and work closely with all the other groups to build, test, and ultimately deploy the toolkit. We also benefited from the contributions of 5 Dcraft consultants who added additional expertise in key theme areas, including library assessment, privacy, diversity and equity, instructional design, and accessibility. The Dcraft Advisory Group was made up of experts representing the breadth of the galleries, libraries, archives, museums, and repositories, or GLAMOR community. The group provided guidance and feedback on all aspects of the project, including our methods and on our deliverables. Finally, we hired 9 experts to assist with specialized areas of knowledge for the grant. And for the complete bios of all group members, you can visit our Dcraft webpage with the URL there on the slide. So one of the first core components of the toolkit are recommended practices, which aggregate existing tools and resources and compile existing strategies for collecting information that can be used for digital object reuse assessment. The team identified 8 central methods currently in existence for collecting data about the reuse of digital content. While a few of the better known methods already have extensive online documentation, the toolkit explains the methods in an easy to understand way from the assessment perspective of a GLAMOR institution practitioner. Documentation on each method includes the following: a definition, a detailed explanation of how that method is used for use and reuse assessment of digital content, a list of common tools that can be used to collect data for this method of assessment, and some of these tools are listed on the right column of the screen, the strengths and weaknesses that we could identify for each method, and highlighted examples that demonstrate this method in use in Glamour institutions. And I'm going to pass it over to Ayla.
Thank you, Santi. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the ethical guidelines and our learning modules. So the ethical guidelines for assessing reuse of digital objects address key principles for assessing reuse, including prioritizing Indigenous and underrepresented communities' concerns and ideas, as well as user privacy. The need for these ethical guidelines was identified in our previous grant project, measuring reuse in focus group discussions centered around privacy, cultural sensitivity, and controversial reuse of digital collection materials. So sections of the ethical guidelines are, of course, the introduction, the scope, because it's about ethical guidelines for assessing reuse, not ethical reuse. Terminology, because everyone has different interpretations of various terms. The core values, which are the core of the guidelines, and further reading. So the core values are inclusion, diversity, equity, accessibility, social justice. That's one. Privacy, traditional knowledge, cultural heritage, and intellectual property, professional development and training, transparency, and awareness. For every core value, we provide a description of the value and practical considerations for a Glamour practitioner to think about when assessing reuse. And we were also able to have the ethical guidelines translated into both Spanish and Mandarin, and translations are available on the DCRAFT website. So the last major aspect of the DCRAFT toolkit is our education modules. Each education or learning object introduces each assessment method at a high level. They can be accessed asynchronously and are self-paced, and they contain the majority of the documentation that's found in the recommended practices. So that is all we have time for. So thank you.
Thank you. Our next presentation is from Mahendra Mahi, joining us virtually to talk about the evolution of GLAM Labs.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. My name's Mahendra Mahi. I work and do research in 3 institutions. Tallinn University in Estonia, which is in Europe, at the Estonian National Museum in Tartu, and as a PhD student at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow, Scotland, United Kingdom. Previously, I worked at the British Library, or BL, where I established and ran BL Labs for nearly 9 years. Next. This was the first digital humanities lab in a national library. It got users to reuse and remix the library's digital heritage. I made it a business as usual service in 2021, becoming part of the library's day-to-day operations. Next. Early in BL Labs, we started working computationally with the data, such as running machine learning and AI experiments. For example, we algorithmically cut and AI curated images from digitized public domain books. Please Google the mechanical curator and visit the British Library's Flickr Commons site, where you will find over 1 million free images. This work led to many projects and billions of views, opening the doors of the library to the world and putting its content somewhere where the light was, so people could find it and use it. Next. Over the years, BL Labs supported and/or showcased over 450 other projects that usually did something cool with the British Library's data. Users included researchers, artists, entrepreneurs, educators, communities, and staff from several organizations. Next. My vision is labs should connect people to data. I did this through competitions and residencies, awards, exhibitions, roadshows, educational training programs, ideas labs, and data workshops. We even ran an algo rave where we got artists to perform the data through live algorithmically generated rave music, and we experimented with stand-up comedy and even theatre. There were lots of networking and sharing based on principles of openness and kindness, trying to break down barriers of caginess that sometimes existed in institutions amongst staff. We often employed Chatham House rules in meetings where what was said stayed in the room, and therefore people could be honest about some of the real challenges that exist in GLAMs. They discussed topics such as conservative attitudes, colonial mindsets, and resistance to change, failure, and experimentation. Next. I helped establish the GLAM Labs community, which is still active today, and Gustavo mentioned earlier. Next. BL Labs launched a collections as data portal as early as 2015 with DOIs. Next. At Tallinn University, I'm a senior research development advisor where I write proposals and lead a network of project managers to get them to be better at implementing projects. Next, please. After fighting with my own, click, please. Next, sorry. Okay. After fighting with my own mixed opinions and experiences of academia, I have decided at the young age of 57 to embark on a PhD at the University of Strathclyde. My supervisor is Dr. Milena Dobreva and Professor Ian Ruthven in the Department of Computer and Information Science. I want to consolidate the things that I have learned working in innovation and GLAM labs and investigate new developments. I want to leave a kind of legacy and inspire others, and I'm feeling quite inspired myself beginning this journey. My lesson to you all, it's never too late to find the meaning in your professional life. I'm going to ask one of many questions in my research. Next. What lessons can be learned from the establishment, life cycle, impact, and evolution of GLAM labs? I will use mixed quantitative and qualitative research methods, and will create personal accounts using autoethnographical techniques such as confessional field notes that will capture thoughts, reflections, and conversations I will have with myself and with others who work in GLAMs, conduct and analyze many semi-structured interviews, document 3 case studies with GLAMs that still exist but have evolved and changed over their existence in different ways, and I will have 1 case study in a GLAM that is planning to have a lab. I will also do a repeat survey I ran in 2018 to compare how things have changed in GLAM labs and run a new one capturing the changes that are happening now. There will be lots of research and analysis, of course. So what have I done since October 24? 26 interviews with those who reused and remixed digital heritage with people providing services for users in GLAM lab settings. Next. I will then analyze the results and look for patterns, sustainable long-term impact, identify life cycles, capture the evolution, changes of labs, and the use of AI. I hope to provide recommendations for GLAMs to increase their use of digital heritage and to help the sector grow new GLAM labs or services. If you know someone I should talk to or a study I should look into, please contact me. Next one. Next slide. Click, please. Next. Lastly, I work as a researcher at the Estonian National Museum in Europe. The principal investigator is Dr. Pilar Runnel. Next. We are looking at how working with digital cultural heritage has or could lead to social development or impact in groups and or communities. We are currently mapping policies and user experiences related to the use of digital cultural heritage and conducting interviews and surveys to understand the current situation. We want to identify possible bottlenecks where support and new solutions are needed to increase the uptake of digital heritage as a social resource. Next. We hope to establish some theoretical understanding of how this process might work and develop the heritage sector's capacity to use digital heritage. We also want to expand the use of co-creation methods to make sense of engaging with digital heritage and to transfer knowledge about heritage into society. Next year, we hope to run some practical activities with different community groups using digital heritage and then learn which ones work best. Next. If you know of any uses of digital cultural heritage that have led to social impact, please contact me. I hope to meet some of you one day. Now we'll pass back to the session moderators. Thank you.
Our final virtual presenter joining us from Argentina, Jimena del Rio Riende. Oh, trying to get the slide to advance. There we go. Go ahead,
Perdón.
Jimena.
Sí. Yo en este caso traigo un ejemplo, si se quiere, más práctico y técnico relacionado con el tema de la sesión, que fue la implementación de detección de lengua para repositorios institucionales en un trabajo que hicimos entre distintos investigadores del CONICET y de la Universidad Nacional de La Plata en el repositorio de la biblioteca de la Universidad de La Plata. Me gustaría explicar, y antes de comenzar digamos, mi explicación, decirles que hay un punto, si se quiere, de interés en el trabajo con un repositorio en una biblioteca de una universidad nacional argentina. Desde casi el año 2010 se embarcó en el fallo de una ley de acceso abierto en el país, con lo que se llamó a sostener y a fortalecer los repositorios institucionales con las producciones de los profesores y de los investigadores de las distintas universidades, con los que los repositorios en nuestras universidades son espacios densamente poblados de una gran cantidad de material de muy diferente tenor. Próxima slide, next slide. Entonces, como les decía, el enorme volumen de los recursos almacenados en nuestros repositorios digitales representa una gran dificultad a la hora de supervisar y de corregir errores o de mejorar la calidad de los metadatos. Y lo que hicimos en este proyecto, que no fue un proyecto subvencionado ni financiado, sino que es un proyecto institucional en el que el trabajo fue ad honorem y para aprender sobre cuestiones relacionadas con modelos de lengua, nos enfocamos en la corrección del metadato idioma, o sea, lengua, en los registros de resúmenes del repositorio institucional CEDICI, que pertenece a la Universidad Nacional de La Plata, como les comentaba, y que, insisto, puede pertenecer tanto, por ejemplo, a libros, capítulos de libro, preprints, artículos de revista, etc. Next slide, próxima. Me falta la de datos y metodología, que es la anterior. Gracias. Entonces, a partir de un dataset exportado del repositorio de unos más de 120.000 ítems, planificamos una tarea de detección automática de idiomas utilizando diferentes librerías existentes compatibles con un método específico que se llama Zero Shot. Utilizamos diferentes librerías, como algunas conocidas, como Polyglot, que es bastante conocido, LangDetect. Luego, comparamos los resultados obtenidos con los datos de los idiomas registrados por el personal, por los humanos personales, ¿no? Que se dedican a catalogación en el repositorio. Y para tratar de mejorar aún más la detección de los idiomas, entrenamos un modelo de MBERT multilenguaje y comparamos su desempeño con un conjunto más pequeño de ítems cuya clasificación por idiomas era diferente entre lo que habían hecho los catalogadores humanos y la biblioteca Polyglot. Siguiente slide. ¿Qué resultados obtenimos? En general, todas las librerías de detección de idiomas mostraban alrededor de un 95% de coincidencia con los idiomas identificados y catalogados por los humanos. En el caso de los modelos MBERT entrenados, las coincidencias obtenidas son bajas tanto para los idiomas detectados automáticamente por Polyglot como para los catalogados por humanos. Y se encontraron algunos errores de catalogación que evidentemente eran atribuibles a los humanos, pero también errores de los modelos de lenguaje a la hora de hacer tareas de detección, ¿no? O sea, había como errores de distinto tipo. Next slide, próxima. ¿Qué tiene de interesante este trabajo que hicimos donde se comparó un poco este trabajo humano con el trabajo de modelos de lengua? Más allá de que podemos decir que evidentemente el trabajo con los modelos de lengua, al tener el modelo ya hecho, funcionaba mucho más rápido. Lo interesante, creo, de esto es que en realidad desde la parte, ¿no?, de ética que estamos revisando en esta sesión, es que muchas de las librerías demostraron fallar en la detección, inclusive, de los idiomas mayoritarios, cuando el texto del resumen está compuesto a veces por simples listados de palabras, cuando hay una lista de palabras o frases listadas. Una tarea importante que resta realizar, pero que requerirá de la intervención de etiquetadores humanos, es la de reetiquetar el porcentaje de resúmenes que no contaban con el campo de idioma, o sea, que no tenían definido el idioma, y definir cuál es la opción correcta en los casos en los que las bibliotecas y los modelos no coincidieron con el idioma catalogado. Decirles también que este es un trabajo que recién comenzamos este año, que es muy inicial y que fue presentado hace muy poco en Chile en el Congreso sobre Repositorios y Bibliotecas de América Latina, en América Latina. Vamos a las conclusiones. Next slide, para cerrar. Bien, ¿cuál es la conclusión de este resumen del trabajo que hicimos? Por un lado, que los modelos de lengua necesitan siempre de la revisión humana. En nuestro caso nos dimos cuenta que será necesario desarrollar una herramienta de interacción con los catalogadores humanos. Probablemente se requiera de más de un humano para controlar los datos, que permita volver, por ejemplo, a clasificar alrededor del 5% de los ejemplos que conforman el subconjunto de datos en los que la catalogación y la detección de lengua no coincidieron. Solo una vez que se tenga la etiqueta de idioma correcta en todos los resúmenes se podrá evaluar con total certeza el desempeño de las herramientas digitales o herramientas de inteligencia artificial utilizadas. Y algo que creemos que es de interés, porque es algo que ha empezado a suceder en gran parte de los portales de bibliotecas digitales, donde se ha puesto en abierto para los usuarios de las bibliotecas chats de consulta de materiales de la biblioteca que creemos que todavía necesitan de ser probados para que no haya sesgos y no haya fallas en las búsquedas, para que estos asistentes den respuestas correctas a los usuarios, es que antes de utilizar estas herramientas en abierto para el público, es mejor probarlas en proyectos internos, como son los que nosotros estamos desarrollando, hasta que creamos que funcionan de la manera más acertada. Creemos que hay mucho por hacer y que este proyecto nos invita a ser más cuidadosos en la aplicación de estas tecnologías frente a nuestro público. Muchas gracias.
One moment, we're taking the microphone to the audience.
Thank you. I'm Carlos Montero from National University of Costa Rica. I would like to ask to Gustavo that if he can explain more details about the project, because we are developing a science and technology observatory in the bibliotechology of National University. So we are completely interested in the project. Thank you.
Gustavo?
Ok. ¿Puedo contestar en español o preferís que sea en inglés? Do you prefer if I speak in English?
It's your preference.
Ah, ok. Sí, muchas gracias, Carlos, por tu interés en la comunidad internacional GLAM Labs Community y obviamente, como he dicho, si estáis interesados en participar en la comunidad, os podéis poner en contacto con nosotros y, por ejemplo, podéis aparecer en el mapa y podéis, en las siguientes reuniones que tengamos, podéis participar y os podéis dar de alta, por ejemplo, en la lista de correo y podéis compartir el trabajo que estéis realizando y en la medida de nuestras posibilidades estaremos yo mismo encantado de ofrecer las buenas prácticas que nosotros promovemos dentro de la comunidad y si os puedo ayudar en cualquier cosa y si no, estoy seguro que el resto de miembros de la comunidad os puede ayudar para poner, si estáis creando un laboratorio, pues para ponerlo en funcionamiento y qué pautas podéis seguir. ¿Tienes alguna pregunta en concreto?
No.
¿O qué es lo que estáis realizando, por ejemplo?
Sí, un momento. Yeah.
Thank you, Gustavo. Can you explain a little bit about the services in these laboratories or about the processes that you have into the laboratory and what are the products specific that the laboratory offers?
En,
Thank you.
en la comunidad internacional GLAM Labs lo que tenemos en la web es a modo de demostración. Lo que tenemos son diferentes secciones donde hemos agregado proyectos, por ejemplo, que demuestran cómo realizar el acceso computacional a colecciones digitales basándonos en colecciones de Jupyter Notebooks, por ejemplo. En otra sección tienes información sobre cómo publicar collection as data o colecciones como datos, siguiendo una serie de pasos. Eso quizá te puede resultar interesante si estáis pensando en publicar alguna colección. Y otro de los proyectos que presentamos en Islandia, como he comentado en mi presentación, era cómo crear, cómo diseñar una colección de Jupyter Notebooks desde cero, qué cosas deberíamos pensar. Y si buscas en los artículos de investigación que he publicado, la mayoría de ellos se basan en la comunidad internacional GLAM Labs y puedes coger ideas sobre cómo publicar Collecting as Data. Tengo experiencia, hemos realizado algunos trabajos basados en Wikidata también, pero lo que es servicios en la web nosotros no ofrecemos. Es como un escaparate de los servicios que tú tengas en tu lab. Por ejemplo, si tienes una colección de Jupyter Notebooks, pues nosotros la podemos publicitar en esa web, por ejemplo. O si tienes algún trabajo, podrías participar en un webinar y presentas ese trabajo que has hecho.
Right. And I want to take a moment to say part of the RDA interest group, the collections as data interest group that the session is for, is connecting the work that has been done, by the GLAM Labs community and bringing it into conversation with the larger RDA community. And then maybe you can build upon the work from GLAM Labs to say, okay, well, this particular set of services that GLAM Labs has collated and collected from its members, if we build on that to this AI parameters of use question or something like that, maybe that happens in this interest group and shares back to GLAM Labs, and it just becomes much more of this flowing information exchange. Other questions? Yeah.
Buenos días para la compañera argentina. ¿Este trabajo que realizaron ya está disponible en el repositorio de ustedes o en qué sitio web se podría consultar? Gracias.
Gracias por la pregunta. Sí, ya está disponible. Ahora, si me dan unos minutos mientras seguimos aquí en la sala, puedo poner el link al trabajo. De todos modos, va a ser publicado en las actas del Congreso de Viredial, que no sé si, bueno, los colegas de aquí de Costa Rica conocen esta red. Creo que hay instituciones, lo voy a dejar también en el chat, Viredial ISTEC, por si quieren luego también consultar la propuesta de Viredial ISTEC, más allá de este trabajo específico. Ahora voy a tratar de buscar el link para compartirlo. Muchas gracias por la pregunta.
Yeah, and if you want to approach after conclude to the stage, then we can show the link that's in the chat if you're not on the Zoom.
I'll also say we'll also add these resources to our collaborative notes for this session.
Other questions?
Do you have one in chat?
Please.
Okay, I'll read one off from chat. This question is for Santi and Ayla. Are you aware of organizations that are currently using Dcraft, and or is there a feedback mechanism that could iterate and expand the toolkit in light of uses by AI? Artificial.
So we are currently not aware of institutions who are using Dcraft, sure, in its entirety. We have, like this session, completed various presentations to different constituency groups that have an affinity for this kind of work. So we wouldn't be surprised if it were used in those areas, but have no concrete data to go from currently. So if you are using it, we would love to hear from you. We do on our website have a contact form that folks can fill out to leave any kind of feedback they would like, including instances of how they were able to use the toolkit for their assessment practices.
So we do have one particular deliverable that we didn't mention as part of the presentation, and that was we created a template takedown policy that came out of, again, concerns from Indigenous communities wanting to be able to request that materials that maybe shouldn't have been shared with certain groups or outside of the community can be taken down. And I know that was really popular and has been, well, colleagues at several institutions have said that they will adopt the template, but nobody's followed up with me formally.
And expand on it in light of new AI uses.
So particularly regarding the AI point, that's always possible. We should have been clear in the presentation that Dcraft is a tool for all kinds of assessment opportunities. It's not wedded to any one particular research methodological approach or process or practice. So it's not unrealistic to think that AI and other use cases could influence the content and the direction of the toolkit moving forward. We have been pretty clear that as a project team, we are, at least for now, having done this work for a long time, holding steady with what is currently in the toolkit, but it doesn't preclude the possibility that, particularly if we hear feedback from practitioners, that we might evolve or iterate or revise the toolkit moving forward. But for now, no immediate plans.
Thank you. Additional questions from the audience or chat? Before we turn the tables on you, which means we get to ask you questions. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
As we mentioned at the start of this session, we were also hoping to hear from you all in your local context and leveraging all of your wonderful expertise by asking you a few questions. So one of the questions the group has for you all is information gathering about where all of you are currently or what initiatives you are all involved in. So what are the initiatives and best practices that you use to foster the responsible use of digital collections at your institutions or organizations?
And pretend like we're in a much more intimate setting.
Yes. By show of hands, who is currently involved in or manages or interfaces with their digital collections, repositories, or platforms? Anyone in the room? Okay,
Oh, no.
all right. So we have a few people.
Who works with data that is derived from cultural heritage objects?
Fewer people there, but I think this group in particular provides a really ripe environment for those kinds of discussions as folks get into that space. Or undoubtedly, you might already be engaging in this in some shape or form.
What brought you to the session today? Yeah, please.
Do we
Is
have
there,
a microphone running here? Did she leave?
do you want to,
Oh, there she is.
yeah,
If you could put your hands up, please, so she can see.
I'm behind you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, in the National University, we use database with cultural patrimony or academic patrimony because we saw, analyze, systematize, and visualize data from that database. That database have different typologies of products, for example, papers, database, and so on, from different kind of knowledge fields, arts, humanities, basic science, and all the knowledge areas that the National University have in their faculties. For us is very important stay in this session because we saw some trends and we are seeing that artificial intelligence are influencing the capacity to learn about database and to learn about the academic patrimony that is located in that databases. And thinking about university, we think that university, especially in Costa Rica, have to learn more about their substantive actions using the database. Because in database, you have evidence of what academics do, what they have been researching in their trajectory, and it is a repository of learn that the university need to develop to understand the principal and main areas of research and different things about the research in the university. Thank you.
So you're really focusing, your interest is, how are these things being used in research? But also, how is artificial intelligence interacting with this repository of information from the National University?
Yes, for example, recently we finished a work with the Polytechnic University of Valencia, and they use our database to build science maps using clustering calculation of the main topics that university have developed in their 51 years of existence. With that clusters, they use artificial intelligence to rewrite a research line. And with that kind of methodology, now in the National University, we can saw the 16 areas developed by the research in the university around the 51 years of our university of existence. Well, it is the use of artificial intelligence is this methodology is not related directly with the database, but is related with the analyze of the visualizations and indicators that that database can offer.
Is anyone in the room or online doing similar work or has similar interest?
Can I say something?
Yeah, please.
He compartido un artículo en el chat sobre un trabajo similar a lo que creo que se llama Carlos, a lo que Carlos estaba comentando sobre la identificación de líneas de investigación en artículos. Y en ese artículo de investigación, pues nosotros hicimos un trabajo similar que era pues identificar trending topics, en este caso en periódicos. Y bueno, el artículo está disponible sin licencia, con lo que ahí podéis consultar si os interesa ese tipo de trabajo.
Thank you. Gracias, Gonzalo. We have another comment down here. And it might be faster for you to. Yeah. Here you go.
Okay, so my name is Raina Jenkins. I'm from the World Data System, and my interest in attending here. So I'm not explicitly managing a data repository at this point, but working with a network of data repositories, and that might include collections in this instance. But I'm also interested because, so right now at the World Data System, we've just started a project. We're kind of in the early stages to look at AI data readiness and thinking about what characterizes that for reuse in the AI case. And I'm trying to think, I wanted to see more about how do collections data, how does that look? And is that the same as considerations as what more typical data sets are exploring for AI data readiness? And also looking into how once they are being used by different AI models, how can you know that they were used and track that information? How do we maybe encourage that sort of provenance chain within the models or require it if we can? So similar questions that you're looking at, but I couldn't answer that. Like I'm not directly managing any of these, but working with data repositories who are trying to do similar facing similar challenges in the data space, but I think the collections are probably, there's a lot of intersection there. So trying to understand better what's happening in this community.
Thank you. That's really helpful and maybe giving a little more context from us about the considerations of collections as data versus, a data set, maybe, from an instrument. Um, and then how that fits in with this artificial intelligence question. So they're a bit of nested questions. But I'll start with the beginning. So collections as data refers to the enterprise of looking at cultural heritage artifacts that often are digitized, right? They're a physical manuscript or something, and it becomes a digital object. And in the process of that digitization, you're doing the work to transform it into a computationally available digital object, right? And that's when it becomes the data. The thing that could make that a different treatment than interacting with a data set that's in a repository that is maybe about ecological data, or where you saw the presentation on oceanographic data, is because the cultural heritage objects, involve culture, right? And they usually are about people, about a people, about groups of people, about a society, in ways that are very more tightly identifiable than the ecological data. We learned, of course, from the oceanographic presentation that all data is about culture and society and people and animals and so on. But the cultural heritage data has that very much closer connection. And the work that Hannah and I did with our colleagues Stuart Varner and Thomas Padilla back in the United States was recognizing that with advances in technology, making these collections computationally available requires responsible stewardship actions by the data steward, right? Because we have to think about the impact on the populations that those collections are about. Val, go ahead. So that's one consideration. It's not like you treat it completely different than data, but we wanted to ensure some intentionality behind it.
Okay, yeah, I would actually say there is probably more similarity than realized. So I actually before I worked for the World Data System, I came from an oceanographic data. I was leading the data management at Ocean Networks Canada. And there, we actually dealt with a lot of Indigenous communities along the coast, all the coast of Canada. And I'm actually co-organizing the session this afternoon about Indigenous data governance with Ashley here. And so it does come up a lot, that Indigenous data governance question, in particular with ocean data and environmental data. And for example, oftentimes they're okay to have the data being open, but not for commercial use per se. And so when thinking about AI and the lack of ability to constrain its use in these models today, there is that concern. And so I think there is maybe some overlap in those kind of question marks. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure there is. And we're coming from it from the perspective of our domain, which is around history and information and GLAM and galleries, libraries, archives, museums, backgrounds. So I think that there is unevenness in our field with how well people recognize those kinds of question asking that has to be done, because they're so excited to make these, physical collections that were very difficult for people to get to and access and learn anything about, make them more available through the digitization process. And then the idea of doing very large scale analysis, like the gentleman from the university was talking about, when you have that information, you can do a lot of really interesting computational analysis and look at trends over time. But this question of the AI parameters of use, that was really a big crux of this session, is what is the right approach there for various institutions and the mission that the institution has around establishing those parameters of use. And what does establishing parameters of use really even look like? We have an example, I don't know if it's in the notes document yet, from the National Library in the Netherlands issued a statement articulating their position on the use of generative AI on their collections and its limitation, right? They very clearly designated what that needs to look like because of the risks, the commercialization issues, and the biases that are present. Does that answer most of your thoughts? Do other people here have policies around the use of AI on their data objects or digital objects already in place? And I would also ask, in place and enforceable in some way? By show of hands, do people think they need a policy around AI use of their data? That, like, half, maybe? Maybe half? Did someone say something? So can I ask the people who didn't raise their hand why they don't think they need something in place around it? Or if they were just like checking email, that's okay. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Powers from the United States Geological Survey. We make all of our data just completely freely open as a federally funded asset. So we have not put in place any restrictions to harvesting all that we have. And I expect that we probably won't do that. So.
Yeah, so United States federal agencies generally do not place limitations depending on the agency on the data that becomes made use from the research. So yeah.
But we do restrict, cultural heritage information. I mean, there are some exceptions to freely public data, especially around cultural heritage and sensitive location of sensitive information. So that would be on a case-by-case basis where that was available.
So then those data would not be available through automated means to
Right.
be ingested.
Yep.
I don't want to cut anybody off in the room, but can I interject?
Please, Beth, go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Beth Kazook. I'm a project manager at the Digital Repository in Ireland, and I'm one of the co-chairs of this interest group. So very invested in what this group is doing going forward. As Hannah introduced it at the very beginning, the interest group is still very new. So there's a lot of things that we're talking about around collections as data, and we're trying to move towards a direction of what does the group maybe want to work on next. And just thinking about Raina's question and about what the difference is really between collections as data and data sets, and Yasmin's answer towards that, I'd like to maybe also add on that in a lot of cases, repositories are the stewards of data sets and not necessarily the owners. So maybe there's some hesitancy there in order to apply restrictions because it's not, they don't own the data. It's kind of up to the owner to opt in or out of artificial intelligence or the use of their data sets in commercial use. That's not, you get the researcher who can select what they want. When you're working in cultural heritage, often you are the steward of material, but you have the copyright ownership that's perhaps been passed over to your organization, or you're working with materials that are out of copyright, and you're kind of presenting something in the place of the researcher. You're the one creating the data set. And so there's a lot more tension around what is appropriate, I think, for representing those data sets, those collections as data, versus this is my research and I understand it and I can choose how I want to license it.
Thanks, Beth. Are you all having conversations about this at your institutions, about this point that Beth just spoke about, the ownership versus stewardship, and how much agency you have as stewards to interact with that data and set parameters around that use potentially, and what the impact of artificial, and particularly generative artificial intelligence, but this third party, let's put it that way, a third party actor really taking the corpus of information that you have in your institution and making use of it in ways that you can't determine. How is this being discussed? Because I think it varies quite a bit by context, by where you are situated, whether you're a national agency, whether you're not, if you're private and geographic. It would be very interesting to learn more about that.
And actually, just going back to the question that I think maybe prompted this session in the first place, was how do we gather metrics on what reuse is actually happening generally? Maybe, Mahendra, this is something you could kind of jump in on, because the British Library Labs was promoting reuse for a number of years. Was there an effort there to kind of track what that reuse really looked like, or was it more reliant on you needed your audience to tell you that they were reusing your material?
A really good question. I think, that we were sort of caught in a bit of a loop because what we were trying to do, I think the origins of the lab were about justifying the investment in digitization. So much money had been put into digitizing cultural heritage, and there were big questions about who was actually using it. And I think what we were very keen on doing was to capture those uses. So there was a lot of engagement, and each time the funding round came round to getting more funding for the labs, we had to provide a ton of metrics in terms of how the lab was enabling access. And we used many different kinds of models in terms of how people were accessing content, how I suppose how machines were accessing content. And I suppose, yeah, those metrics were very much in the context of providing justification for the value of opening up collections. And I think that was it, that was in its time. And the question that kind of I'm very curious about is, how do we know if an AI is using your collections? How do we know that?
And maybe should we always assume that an AI is commercial or is, being run for insidious purposes? It could very well be that it's a researcher who wants to use it for machine learning purposes because they have a legitimate research project that they want to utilize AI with. So in attempting to write policies or block certain types of use, are we really just amplifying problems we've always had with our collections, that AI is not different, it's just showing us where we didn't have adequate policies to protect against commercial use to begin with?
Yeah, I think some of the challenges I remember in the very early days of releasing public domain images, and there was a big debate about what the library would lose financially if we did that. And there were several meetings and sort of risk assessment, and then the sort of decision was made. And of course, what happened was when images were released publicly, some of those images ended up on commercial platforms, and they were being resold. And it kind of started a debate internally about what we were doing and the value of what we were doing. But it was a bit like the cat was out of the bag. So, we couldn't really put those things back. So, but it was an interesting debate, I remember at the time. But yeah, I'd be very interested to know how we can block, if we're making access to large data sets, how we block access to AI having access to that.
Santi.
Yeah, so I have a couple of things to bring forward. So the one of the points of Dcraft is very much in the pursuit of trying to understand who is using or reusing materials and why. And so there have been several great examples already given around the idea of how we might document return on investment for the work that has been done on behalf of cultural heritage organizations digitizing materials. And that certainly is one of the, let's say, use cases that we have found that have emerged for the need for deeper and more intentional assessment. But it can be pretty diverse, the motivations for why a group or a researcher or individuals might want to understand how materials are being used and reused, whether those are by other humans or by machines. And so I think one of the areas that this sort of conversation surfaces is just how little awareness we have, what I would say within the galleries, libraries, archives, museums, and repositories landscape, but maybe among the broader RDA community, just how little awareness we have around what ultimately happens with these materials. And one of the motivating factors that might come out of this kind of experience is a more intentional commitment to understanding how we begin to solve that, or at least respond to that question. I'll also say that it never, not to go to a dark place, but it never ceases to amaze me how both humans and machines can do harm to others. One, it's been several years now since Ayla and I ran another project that ultimately led us to develop Dcraft. And that preceding project was really looking to digital library practitioners to help us understand why they were assessing, or if they could assess, why they would assess what they would do. And many people from various communities and groups mentioned the real harm that can come from either malicious or maybe just oblivious uses and reuses of digital cultural heritage materials. And I think that underlying all of these questions around metrics and AI are really the capacity to ensure that we mitigate harm, and we have mechanisms in place to see it, call it out, and hold some accountability within the profession. And I could imagine that a group like this might also have some abilities across the various networks to begin to develop frameworks in which to do just that, to identify harm, or I don't know what the inverse or reverse would be, but good, right? And give really clear and concrete examples of how institutions can see it, acknowledge it, and respond to it when it occurs.
Thank you, Santi. No. Do we have any other questions in the chat? No. Okay. Yes. Time, I think, for one more.
Yeah, I just had one other, this is Raina again. I just had one other comment that I've been thinking about in terms of tracking for AI usage. And I know there's going to be bad actors that won't do this even if this capacity exists. But when I look at, say, data site relationships, there's no relationship existing where you can say this data set was used by this model or vice versa, or even have I don't know if there's a way what the right DOI or persistent identifier is for a model itself, but it would be nice if there was an opportunity for the creators of these models to have their own persistent identifier that they can themselves automatically put that linkage into the data sets or the collections or whatever it is that they're using as part of their training or their ongoing usage. So that might be a way if we could implement that possibility of these relationships and then establish that practice, at least for the researchers who are developing models, and then hopefully also getting that to a broader engagement with, say, the commercial actors, or there's always going to be bad actors, but maybe we can work with the good actors as one mechanism to help automate or drive those linkages to make it much easier to find out how it's been used.
Yeah, thank you. I think you have a question?
There's actually a comment related to that I just wanted to make sure the room was aware of, where there was an analogy given to how these kinds of data have been treated, which was very similar or analogous to checking out a library book. And we track that, right? So is there something there that we can build in order to facilitate the checkout, so to speak, of our data so that we can track that?
But I think the citation kind of aspect of like what gets used in developing a model is still a problem space here. And also depending on how that model is actualized through an agent, through an AI agent. If it's a continually building training set, then that does not meet with FAIR like any longer, because you're not guaranteed to have a reproducible outcome because the data is continually changing. And then the model itself, because people generally are not building explainable AI models, you're unsure on how the algorithm is being, what the algorithmic parameters of the model are and how it interfaces with the new data that feeds back into itself. So there is a larger question. And we're, RDA is handling a lot of this through the AI and data visitation working group with the AI Bill of Rights. And that's really talking about what use could look like. But this very technical aspect of, how does this technology contribute to the research landscape in a way using the practices that we're establishing around FAIR and CARE or not, I think is still to be addressed.
And I think it's particularly further compounded by the ways and the norms and the sort of cultures of the web, right? One of the other things that we found pretty quickly, because it seems easy, right? Like we have ARCs or DOIs or persistent identifiers. There should be a way to track some of this fairly easily, but true lack of attribution that occurs across the web, just in the spirit and the sort of cavalier ways of operating within the web, really undercut a lot of that basic, what we would think in research terms would be just basic citation and attribution processes. That breaks down pretty quickly, particularly if you are trying to assess for how use and reuse is occurring over the web and across the web, and maybe through iterations of interactions over the web. So there's a whole lot of opportunities here, right, for contributions and for trying to help create what potentially could be change to make things like tracking and assessment of use and reuse, or understanding where AI plays a role, more possible.
Thank you. And that you will have the last word, Santi. Thank you for that. We're at our time, and I want to thank our presenters on Zoom, Jimena, Gustavo, and Mahendra. Thank you so much. Beth, thanks for coming in from Ireland. And thank you all here for attending the session.